You are not matter. You are a pattern, and patterns don't die. Every atom in your body has existed since the Big Bang and will exist long after your last breath. Physics doesn't have a word for gone, and that changes everything. You know, I want to start with something that most people are afraid to even think about clearly. And I think the reason they're afraid is not because the answer is terrible. I think it's because nobody ever sat down and actually looked at it honestly. So let's do that. Let's just look at it. What actually happens when you die? Now, right away, people get uncomfortable. They want to jump to philosophy. They want to jump to religion. And look, I'm not knocking any of that. People have been wrestling with this question for thousands of years, and they've come up with some genuinely beautiful ideas. But I want to try something different tonight. I want to try to answer it the way we'd answer any other question about nature, by looking at what we actually know. And here's the first thing we know, the most basic thing, the thing that is so fundamental that if you really sit with it, it will change the way you think about yourself forever. Matter is never created and it is never destroyed. That's not a guess. That's not a belief. That's one of the most tested, most verified, most battle-hardened facts in all of science. The conservation of mass and energy. Every experiment, every measurement, every particle accelerator we've ever built has confirmed it. Nothing, and I mean nothing, in the known universe simply disappears. So right away we have a problem with the conventional idea of death, don't we? Because when most people say gone, they mean gone, like something stopped existing. But that's not what physics says. Physics says what you're made of has been around for about 13.8 billion years. Every single atom in your body, the carbon in your bones, the iron in your blood, the calcium in your teeth, all of it was forged inside stars that exploded before our sun was even born. You are, in a very literal and non-poetic sense, made of stardust, not metaphorically. Actually, now here's where it gets really interesting. What does it mean to be you, exactly? Think about it this way. Take a flame, a candle flame. Is that flame a thing? You'd say, sure, there it is. I can see it. It's flickering. But if I look at the molecules in a candle flame, they're not the same molecules from one second to the next. The wax is burning up. New molecules are coming in from the air. The whole chemical composition is changing constantly. The flame isn't a fixed collection of stuff. It's a pattern. It's a process that maintains its own shape. And here's the uncomfortable, beautiful truth. So are you. Every cell in your body gets replaced. The atoms that make up your liver today are not the atoms that were in your liver 7 years ago. The water molecules cycling through you right now were in a river, then in a cloud, then in someone else, then in the ocean, and they'll leave you and go back out into the world. You are not a fixed thing. You are a pattern of organization. You are a shape that matter takes temporarily and then reorganizes into something else. Now, someone in the back is probably thinking, okay, fine, but the pattern ends, doesn't it? When I die, that particular arrangement is done, and that's fair. That deserves a real answer. Here's what I'd say. Think about a wave in the ocean. A wave travels thousands of miles across the Pacific. It has a shape. It has a speed. It has a personality. Almost some waves are tall. Some are gentle. Some crash hard. Is that wave a thing? Well, the water molecules themselves aren't actually traveling with the wave. The wave is just a pattern of motion moving through the water. When the wave hits the shore and breaks, did the wave die? Or did the energy that was organized into that wave just become something else? The sound of the crash, the foam, the little ripples that spread out. the warmth of the water. The energy doesn't end. The pattern changes. And I think if you're honest, if you really press on what you mean when you say I, you'll find something like that. You mean this pattern, this particular incredibly complex, astonishingly organized pattern of about 7 octillion atoms. That's a 7 with 27 zeros behind it, all dancing together in a way that produces you. Your memories, your laugh, the particular way you worry about things. And yes, that specific dance, that specific arrangement will not last forever. But here's what will last. Every single bit of matter and energy that was part of that pattern will continue. It will continue in forms we can't fully predict, combining with other atoms, becoming part of other systems, other processes, other patterns. Some of those atoms in your left hand right now were once part of a dinosaur. Some of them have been inside stars. And after you're gone, they'll go on being part of a universe that has been at this for nearly 14 billion years and has no obvious intention of stopping. So the question isn't really, do you end? Because in the physical sense, nothing about you ends. The question is more subtle than that. The question is, what do you mean by you? And this is where physics sort of hands the problem back to you, which I find wonderfully honest of it. Because physics can tell you about conservation. It can tell you about entropy, which is the tendency of organized systems to become less organized over time, to spread out, to mix with their environment. It can tell you about thermodynamics and chemistry and the beautiful mess of cellular biology. But it can't tell you whether the pattern is what matters or whether the substrate is what matters. That's a question about what you value about yourself. And that's genuinely up to you. But here's what I keep coming back to. Here's the thing that I think is worth really sitting with. Most of us walk around with this feeling, and I think it's a very natural feeling that we are somehow separate from everything else. That there is me, this thing in here, and then the world, this thing out there. And death feels like a threat because it feels like the me will be extinguished and the world will go on without it. But physics doesn't support that picture. You are not a visitor to this universe. You are not a ghost operating a meat machine. You are the universe. You are the universe doing what it does, taking matter, organizing it in increasingly interesting and complicated ways, letting it think and feel and wonder and love, and then reorganizing it. You are never separate from any of it. Not for a single second. There's a beautiful consequence of the conservation of energy that I don't think people appreciate enough. It means the universe has a kind of deep memory. Everything that has ever happened has left a trace. Every interaction between particles changes the state of the universe in some way that propagates forward. The universe right now is the way it is partly because you exist, partly because of every thought you've had, every meal you've eaten, every conversation you've been part of. Those influences ripple outward. They don't disappear when you do. Now, I'm not saying this to make you feel better. I'm genuinely suspicious of arguments designed primarily to make people feel better. That's a job for other people, not for physics. I'm saying it because it appears to be true. And true things are interesting regardless of whether they're comforting or not. The truth is that the universe is far stranger and far more interesting than the story most of us were told about it. We were told a story where there are things, and then the things stop existing. But the actual story, the one nature, is telling us through every experiment, every observation, every measurement we've ever made, is a story about transformation. about patterns and processes, about energy moving through forms the way light moves through a prism, bending and changing, but not being lost. You know what I find remarkable? If you take a piece of ice, solid, cold, dense, a thing that feels very much like a thing, and you warm it up, it becomes water. Warm it more, and it becomes steam. The same molecules, arranged differently, behave so differently that you might not even recognize them as the same stuff. Which one is the real water? The ice, the liquid, the vapor? The answer is that they're all water. They're all the same thing in different states of organization. We are something like that. The atoms that currently make up a thinking, breathing, feeling human being have been and will be in an astonishing number of other arrangements. Stars, ocean, rock, soil, other living things. And right now, they are arranged into something so complex that it can stand here and ask questions about the nature of its own existence. That's extraordinary. That's genuinely extraordinary, and I think we undersell it when we spend all our time worrying about how long the arrangement lasts, rather than being amazed that it exists at all. The universe is about 13.8 billion years old. The atoms in your body are roughly that old too. You have been around in one form or another for almost the entire history of everything. And you will continue to be around in one form or another for however long the universe keeps going. Whether that counts as you surviving, I genuinely don't know. I don't think anyone does. But I'll tell you what I think it does me. I think it means that the fear of non-existence, the fear of being simply, utterly gone, of vanishing from the fabric of reality, is based on a misunderstanding of how reality works. Reality doesn't do that. Reality doesn't erase things. It transforms them. And maybe that's not the same as the kind of survival that people hope for. Maybe it doesn't feel personal enough. I understand that. I really do. We want the specific pattern to continue. We want the memories and the relationships and the sense of self to carry on. And I can't tell you that those things survive in the way you might hope. But I can tell you this. You are made of material that has been in stars. You are made of material that will be in stars again. For one brief, improbable, extraordinary window of time, that material is arranged into something that can look up at those stars and wonder. And the wondering itself, the fact that the universe arranged itself into something capable of asking questions about its own nature that is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything, the universe, as best as we can tell. Spent about 9 billion years not having anything in it capable of asking why. And then, on a small rocky planet around an unremarkable star in an ordinary galaxy, matter organized itself in such a way that it began to wonder. It began to want to understand. And here we are. Now let me push this even further, because I think there's something we've been skating past that deserves real attention. We talk about time as if it's a river flowing in one direction, carrying things along, dropping them off at the end. But that's not really what physics says about time either. Einstein showed us something deeply uncomfortable and deeply wonderful, which is that time is not a backdrop against which events happen. Time is part of the structure of reality itself. It bends. It stretches. It behaves differently depending on how fast you're moving and how strong the gravitational field is around you. And here's the thing about that, the thing that keeps me up at night in the best possible way. If time is a dimension, the way length and width and height are dimensions, then the past doesn't cease to exist just because we've moved past it. Think about what that means. Right now in this room, you are experiencing this moment. But from the perspective of space-time, from the four-dimensional block that physicists work with, this moment always exists. It has coordinates. It has a location. Your birth exists. Your childhood exists. Every conversation you have ever had exists not in memory, not in record, but as an actual geometric fact of the universe. The physicist's word for this is the block universe. And it's controversial not because the math doesn't work, but because people don't like what it implies. It implies that every moment that has ever happened is in some sense still happening, just at a different coordinate in space-time. The past is not gone. It is elsewhere. Now I want to be careful here, because I'm not saying this means you experience the past again. I'm not making claims about consciousness or experience. Those are much harder problems, and anyone who tells you physics has those figured out is selling you something. What I'm saying is purely geometric, purely about the structure of reality, as physics describes it. And what physics describes is a universe in which nothing is ever truly erased. Which brings me to something else entirely, the second law of thermodynamics. Here's a law that sounds depressing on its face. Entropy always increases. Things fall apart. Organized systems become disorganized. Your hot coffee cools. Your tidy room becomes messy. The universe as a whole is moving toward a state of maximum disorder, a cold, diffuse, equilibrated fog where nothing interesting happens. That's the long game, apparently. And yes, you could look at that and say, see, death is real. Decay is real. Everything falls apart. But here's what's interesting. Here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Before things fall apart, they have to be put together. And the universe is extraordinarily, almost suspiciously good at building things. Stars form from clouds of gas. Planets form around stars. On at least one planet, and I'd bet good money it's not just one, chemistry got complicated enough to become biology. And biology got complicated enough to become you. Entropy is the long-run trend. But locally, temporarily, against the grain of that trend, the universe builds. It constructs. It organizes. It complexifies. And the complexification is real. It's not fighting entropy. It's part of the same process, just running on a different time scale. The sun pours energy into the earth, and that energy gradient is what life surfs on. We are, in the most technical sense, entropy management systems. We take in low entropy energy food, sunlight, and we put out high entropy waste heat, carbon dioxide, and in between. We maintain our extraordinary improbable order. Every living thing is a temporary eddy in the river of entropy, a local reversal, a pocket of defiant organization. And I find that astonishing. Not sad, astonishing. Because it means the universe, while trending toward disorder in the large, keeps producing these pockets of structure and complexity, and here on Earth, at least, awareness. It makes them, sustains them for a while, and then lets them dissolve back into the flow. But the making was real. The sustaining was real. The awareness was real. And now I want to talk about something that I think is the hardest and most interesting piece of all this. Consciousness. I'll be up front. Nobody knows what consciousness is. Not really. We can describe correlates of consciousness, brain states, neural activity, electrochemical signals. We can point to where in the brain different experiences seem to originate. But the hard problem, why any of that physical stuff gives rise to experience, to the feeling of being something, to the fact that there is something it is like to be you, that problem remains genuinely deeply open. And I think people often assume that because we can't explain consciousness, it must be something extra, something non-physical, something that gets added to the physical machinery and then, at death, floats away or vanishes. But that assumption isn't justified. It might be right. It might be wrong. We honestly don't know. What we do know is that your experience, your awareness, your sense of self is tightly coupled to a physical process. Change the chemistry of the brain and you change the experience. Damage parts of the structure and you damage parts of the self. That's a very tight coupling. So tight that it's hard to see how the experience could continue without the structure. But, and this is a genuine but, not a comforting dodge, the atoms that make up that structure will persist. The information encoded in those atoms, the patterns of connection and interaction, will disperse. Where does that information go? Nowhere. Technically, it spreads out. It distributes itself across the universe in ways that become practically impossible to reverse, but are not strictly speaking erased. This is what haunts me about information theory. Information is physical. It's not an abstraction floating above matter. It is a property of matter, of how matter is arranged. And the laws of physics at the deepest quantum mechanical level appear to be reversible, which means information, in principle, is never destroyed. It becomes inaccessible. It becomes scrambled beyond any practical hope of recovery. But the laws that govern particles don't allow for true erasure. Stephen Hawking spent decades arguing that black holes could destroy information, and the physics community essentially refused to let him have it. The consensus, still contested in details, but broadly accepted, is that even black holes don't destroy information. They encode it, scramble it, release it eventually in a form so degraded it might as well be gone. But it isn't gone. So here we are. You are a pattern. The pattern will change. The information that constitutes the pattern will spread across the universe in increasingly inaccessible forms. The atoms will continue. The energy will continue. The imprint you've made on the state of the universe, every interaction, every ripple will propagate forward forever, because that's what physics says has to happen. What I keep returning to is this. The question what happens after you die might be the wrong question. Or rather, it might be a question that contains a hidden assumption, the assumption that you is a clearly defined, bounded, persistent thing that either continues or doesn't. But if what you are is a process, a pattern, a temporary eddy in an ancient river, then the question of what happens after is a little like asking what happens to the music after the song ends. The air that carried the sound is still there. The vibrations have spread outward, getting quieter, mixing with other sounds, becoming part of the general hum of the world. The specific organized pattern of pressure waves that was the song is gone. But nothing that made the song possible has ceased to exist. The atoms play on. The energy moves on. The universe, vast and indifferent and extraordinarily interesting, continues doing what it has always done, building, dissolving, building again, in forms we can barely begin to imagine. And you were part of that. You are part of that. Not were. Are, because the block universe doesn't use past tense. The coordinates of your existence are fixed in space-time, permanent in whatever way anything in physics is permanent, which turns out to be a much stronger kind of permanent than we usually imagine when we use that word. What I find most remarkable, and I want to leave you sitting with this, not as a conclusion, but as an open door, is that the universe didn't have to be this way. The laws of physics could have been different. Entropy could increase so fast that no complexity ever forms. The constants of nature could have been slightly off, and stars never form, and chemistry never happens, and there is nobody, nowhere, asking any questions at all. But instead, the universe is precisely tuned in ways we don't fully understand to allow complexity, to allow structure, to allow, against all probabilistic odds, the emergence of things that look up at the night sky and want to know what they're seeing. That wanting, that drive to understand, that's what's strange. That's what's hard to explain. Not just the physics of it, but the fact of it. That matter, organized just so, starts wanting things, starts building models of reality, starts asking whether death is real. And I don't know what to make of that. I genuinely don't. But I find it the most interesting fact I know. So let me tell you what I think we should do with all of this. Not mourn, not panic, not retreat into comfortable stories that physics can't verify. I think we should live differently. Because here is what the physics is actually telling you if you listen to it without flinching. It is telling you that you are not a small, fragile, temporary accident trying to survive in a universe that doesn't care about you. It is telling you something almost violently more interesting than that. It is telling you that you are the universe, not a piece of it, not a visitor to it. The universe in you has managed to become aware of itself, has managed to look back at its own laws, its own history, its own astonishing improbability, and understand them. That has never happened before in the 4 billion years of life on this planet. Not like this. Not with this kind of depth and reach and hunger for truth. And you're going to spend that on fear? I'm serious. Think about what you actually are for a moment. You are 13 billion years of cosmic evolution, compressed into a few cubic feet of organized matter, somehow producing the experience of being. Every atom in you has traveled from the center of a dying star to this room. The iron that carries oxygen through your blood was forged in a supernova explosion that happened before the Earth existed. You are the end product, the temporary, glorious end product of a process so old and so vast that the human mind genuinely cannot hold it all at once. And the thing that scares you is that it ends, it doesn't end. I've spent this entire time trying to show you it doesn't end. It changes, it transforms. The specific arrangement shifts. The pattern opens and its pieces flow back into the larger pattern, the one that was here before you and will be here after. You don't vanish. You participate. You are always participating. You just didn't notice because you were busy being you, which when you think about it is a pretty good reason. Here's the message I want to leave you with, and I want it to land hard, because I mean it hard. Every moment you spend paralyzed by the fear of death is a moment you spend failing to notice that you are alive. And being alive, actually alive, aware, capable of thought and feeling and curiosity, is the rarest and most astonishing thing the universe has ever produced that we know of. The universe ran for 9 billion years before it made anything capable of asking a question. 9 billion years of stars burning and exploding, galaxies colliding, matter swirling in gravitational fields, and not one question asked. Not one moment of wonder. Not one instant of what is this and why does it work this way. And then, on a small wet rock, that changed. You are that change. You are what happens when the universe finally, after 9 billion years of trying, builds something complicated enough to be curious. And that curiosity, that itch to understand, that refusal to accept, I don't know, as a permanent answer, that is not a side effect of being human. That is, I would argue, the whole point of being human. Maybe the point of the universe building anything at all. So stop spending your one extraordinary, improbable, cosmically unprecedented, window of awareness rehearsing its end. Physics has already told you, nothing ends, it changes. The question isn't whether you'll continue, you will. In every atom, in every ripple of influence you've sent into the causal structure of the universe, in the space-time coordinates that will always mark the fact that you were here. The question is what you're going to do with the time when the pattern is still tight, still coherent, still you. That's the real question. And physics can't answer it. Only you can. The universe gave you awareness for a reason we don't fully understand. Don't waste it being afraid of the one thing that was never going to happen anyway. Nothing is lost. Everything continues. And you right now, in this form, in this pattern, in this brief and dazzling arrangement of ancient stardust, you are the most interesting thing any of it has ever become.